Chapter 2 of Ruth Fielding at the War Front. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ruth Fielding at the War Front by Alice B. Emerson. At the Chateau. The two girls, arm in arm, approached the postern gate beside the wide iron grille that was never open save for the passage of horses or a motor car. There was a little round shutter in the postern at the height of a man's head, for aforetime the main gateway had been of massive oak, bolt-studded and impervious to anything less than cannon shot. The wall of masonry that surrounded the chateau was both high and thick, built 400 years or so before, for defense. An old-fashioned rope-pull hung beside the postern. Henriette dragged on this sharply, but the girls could not hear the tongue of the bell, for it struck far back in the so-called offices of the chateau, where the serving people had had their quarters before these war times had come upon the earth. Now there were but few servants remaining at the chateau. For the most part, the elderly Countess Marchand lived alone and used but few of the rooms. As the girls waited in answer to their summons, Henriette said, in reference to what had already passed in conversation between them, "It hurts me, dear friend, that anybody should doubt the loyalty of our Countess, whom we know to be so good. Why, there are people even wicked enough to connect her with that awful thing we know of," and the girl dropped her voice and looked suddenly around her, as though she feared an unseen presence, as though she were a werewolf, she added, with a shudder. "Pooh!" and Ruth Fielding laughed. Nobody in their senses would connect Madame la Comtesse with such tales, having once seen her. She knew now, as they waited, of her first visit to the chateau, and of the appearance of the Countess Marchand in her bare library. Whatever her sons might be, the young count who was missing, or this major whom she had just met in the grassy lane, Ruth Fielding was confident that the lady of the chateau was a loyal subject of France, and that she was trusted by the government. Ruth had called here herself on that occasion with a secret agent, Monsieur Lafrance, to clear up the mystery of a trio of criminals who had come from America to prey upon the Red Cross. These crooks had succeeded in robbing the supply department of the Red Cross, in which Ruth herself was engaged, but in the end they had fallen into the toils of the French Secret Service, and Ruth had aided in their overthrow. All this is told in the volume of the series immediately preceding our present story, entitled Ruth Fielding in the Red Cross, or Doing Her Best for Uncle Sam. This was the 13th volume of the Ruth Fielding series. Of the 12 books that have gone before that, only a brief mention can be made, while Ruth and the young French girl are waiting for an answer to the bell. At first we meet Ruth Fielding as she approaches Cheslow and the Red Mill beside the Lumano River, where Uncle Jabez, the miserly miller, awaits her coming in no pleasant frame of mind. He is her only living relative, and he considers little Ruth Fielding a charity child. She is made to feel this by his treatment and by the way in which the girls in the district school talk of her. Ruth makes 3 friends from the start, however, who in their several ways help her to endure her troubles. One is Aunt Elvira Boggs, who is nobody's relation but everybody's aunt, and whom Jabez Potter, the miller, has taken from the poorhouse to keep his home tidy and comfortable. Aunt Elvira sees the good underlying miserly Uncle Jabez's character when nobody else can. She lavishes upon the little orphan girl all the love and affection that she would have given to her own children had she been blessed with any. Ruth's other 2 close friends were the Cameron twins, Helen and Tom, the children of a wealthy storekeeper who lived not far from the Red Mill. The early adventures of these 3 are all related in the first book of the series, Ruth Fielding of the Red Mill. One virtue of Uncle Jabez's, which shines as brightly in his rather gloomy character as a candle in the dark, is that he always pays his debts. If he considers he owes anybody anything, he is not satisfied until he pays it. Therefore, when Ruth recovers some money which had been stolen from him, he is convinced that it is only right for him to pay her tuition for at least a year at Briarwood Hall, where she goes to school with Helen Cameron, while Tom goes to a boys' boarding school called Seven Oaks. The girls and Tom and his friends often got together for good times during their school years, and in successive volumes we meet them in winter adventures in the northern woods at Snow Camp, in the summer at Lighthouse Point, in Wyoming at Silver Ranch, in lakeside and woodsy adventure on Cliff Island, enjoying most exciting weeks at Sunrise Farm, where Ruth wins a reward of $5,000 in aiding in the recovery of a pearl necklace stolen by the gypsies. There are volumes, too, telling of the serious loss by fire of a dormitory building at Briarwood, and how Ruth Fielding rebuilt it by the production of a motion picture, of her vacation down in Dixie, of her first year at Ardmore College, which she and Helen and several of her Briarwood chums entered, then of Ruth Fielding in the saddle when she went west again, this time for the production of a great picture entitled The 49ers. With the entrance into the War of the United States, Tom Cameron enlisted and went to France as a second lieutenant with the 1st Expeditionary Force. Ruth and Helen went into Red Cross work, leaving college before the end of their sophomore year for that purpose. Ruth could not go as a nurse, but in the supply department she gained commendation, and when a supply unit of the Red Cross was sent to France, she went with it, while Helen went over with her father, who was on a commission to the front. Once there, the black-eyed girl found work to do in Paris, while Ruth was enabled to be of use much nearer the front. Indeed, at the opening of the present story, the girl of the Red Mill is at work in the evacuation hospital at Clare, right behind a sector of the battle line that had been taken over by General Pershing's forces. Tom Cameron is with his regiment not many miles away. Indeed, his company might be engaged in this very activity that had suddenly broken out within sound, if not in sight, of Clare and the Chateau Marchand. There was reason for Ruth Fielding's gravity of countenance, and grave it was, despite its natural cheerfulness of expression, for her interest in Tom Cameron and his interest in her had long been marked by their friends. Tom was in peril daily, hourly. It was no wonder that she revealed the ravages of war upon her mind. "Shh!" whispered Henriette. "Here comes Dolge, the gardener. Now that Bessie is gone, he is the oldest person Madame la Comtesse has in her employ. I wonder what became of Bessie. Monsieur Lefranc told me she was not apprehended with those men who helped her get away from the chateau. It is a mystery. She had served Madame so many years, and then, at the last, they say she was a spy for les Boches." Dolge appeared with his toothless grin at the round opening in the postern. "The little Hetty and Mademoiselle la Marican," he mumbled. "Madame la Comtesse expects you." He unchained the door and let them pass through. Then he shut and chained the door again, just as though the chateau was besieged. The girls did not wait for him. They walked up the curved avenue to the wide entrance to the great pile of masonry. The chateau was as large as a good-sized hotel. Before the war there had been many comforts Ruth understood that now the Countess was doing without. For instance, electric lights and some kind of expensive heating arrangement. Now the lady at the chateau burned oil or candles like the peasants, and the chateau doors were wide open that the sun and air of this grateful day might help dry the tomb-like atmosphere of the reception hall. "Ma foi," said Henriette, commenting on this in a low voice, "even the beautiful old armor, the suits of mail that the ancient Marchands wore in the times of the Crusades, is rusty. See you, Madame has not servants enough now to begin to care for the place." "I suppose she has stored away the rugs and the books from the library shelves," began Ruth, but Henriette quickly said, "No, no, you do not understand, mademoiselle, what our good lady has done. The wonderful rug she has sold, that off the library floor, which they say the old Count himself brought from Bagdad, and the books, all her library, have gone to the convalescent hospitals, or to the poilus in the trenches, for they, poor men, need the distraction of reading." "And some of your neighbors suspect her?" repeated Ruth thoughtfully. "It is because of that awful thing, the werewolf," hissed Henriette. Then there was time for no further speech. A middle-aged woman appeared, asked the girls in, and led the way to the library. A table was set near the huge open fireplace, in which a cheerful fire crackled. On the table was a silver tea-service and some delicate porcelain cups and saucers. The kettle boiled on the hob. Chairs were drawn close before the blaze, for despite the springiness in the air without, the atmosphere in the vast library of the chateau was damp and chill. As the girls waited before the fire, a curtain at the end of the room swayed, parted, and the tall, plainly robed figure of the Countess entered. She had the air of a woman who had been strikingly beautiful in her younger days. Indeed, she was beautiful still. Her snowy hair was dressed becomingly. Her cheeks were naturally pink and quite smooth, despite the countless wrinkles that netted her throat. The old lace at the neck of her gown softened her ivory-hued skin and made its texture less noticeable. Her gown was perfectly plain, cut in long sweeping lines, nor did she wear a single jewel. She swept forward, smiling and holding out her hand to Ruth. "Here is our little Hetty," she said, nodding to the French girl, who blushed and bridled, and Mademoiselle Fielding, giving the latter a warm hand-clasp, and then patting Henriette's cheek. "Welcome." She put them at their ease at once. The few family portraits on the walls were all the decorations of the room. The bookcases themselves were empty. Madame la Comtesse made the tea. On the table were thin slices of war bread. There was no butter, no sugar, and no milk. "We are learning much these days," laughed the Countess. "I am even learning to like my chocolate without milk or cream." "Oh!" and Henriette whipped from the pocket of her underskirt something that had been making her dress sag on that side. When she removed the wrapping, she produced a small jar of thick yellow cream. "My child, it is a luxury!" cried the Countess. "I shall feel wicked." "Perhaps it will be nice to feel wicked for once," Ruth said, feeling a little choke in her throat. She drew from concealment her own contribution to the feast, several lumps of sugar. "Do not fear," she added, smiling. "None of the poor poilus are deprived. This is from my own private store. I wish there was more of it, but I can't resist giving a lump now and then to the village children. They are so hungry for it. They call me Mam'selle Sucre." "And I would bring you cream often, madame," Henriette hastened to add, "but our good old Lally died, you know, and the little cow does not give much milk as yet, and it is not as rich. Oh, if that werewolf had not appeared to us! You remember, Mademoiselle Ruth? Then old Lally died at once," and the French girl nodded her head vigorously, being fully convinced of the truth of the old superstition. The Countess flushed and then paled, but nobody but Ruth noticed this. The American girl watched her hostess covertly. The bare mention of a superstition that had the whole countryside by the throat disturbed much the Countess's self-control. The next moment there was a step in the hall, and then the door opened to admit the same young officer Ruth Fielding had met in the lane, Major Henri Marchand. "Pardon, maman," he said, bowing and speaking to his mother, quite like a little boy. "Do I offend?" "Do come in and have a cup of tea, Henri. There is sugar and real cream, thanks to our two young friends here. You remember our petite Hetty, of course. And this is our very brave Mademoiselle Ruth Fielding, of the American Red Cross. My younger son, Monsieur Henri," the Countess said easily. Major Marchand advanced into the room promptly. To Henriette he bowed with a smile. Ruth put out her hand impulsively, and he bowed low above it and touched his lips to her fingers. The girl started a little and glowed. The manner of his address rather shocked her, for she was unused to the European form of greeting. Henri's deep purple eyes looked long into her own brown ones as he lingeringly released her hand. "Mademoiselle," he murmured, "I am charmed." Ruth did not know whether she was altogether charmed or not. She felt that there was something rather overpowering in such a greeting, and she rather doubted the sincerity of it. She could understand, however, little Henriette's sentimental worship of the young Major. Henri Marchand was the type of man to hold the interest of most girls. His eyes were wonderful, his cheek as clear and almost as soft as a woman's. He wore his uniform with an air scarcely to be expressed in ordinary words. Henriette immediately became tongue-tied. Ruth's experience had, however, given her ease in any company. The wonderful Major Marchand made little impression upon her. It was plain that he wished to interest the Americaine mademoiselle. The little tea-party was interrupted by the appearance of Dolge at the library door. "A young American in an ambulance inquires for Mademoiselle Fielding at the gate," said Dolge, cap in hand. "She is needed in haste, below there at the hospital." Chapter 2